A grand, three-story Victorian townhouse, painted a striking sapphire blue, stood proudly on a hilly street in San Francisco's Pacific Heights. Intricate wrought iron railings framed a small, manicured garden where vibrant bougainvillea defiantly cascaded towards the approaching autumn chill. Inside, Eleanor Ainsworth, the mistress of this elegant abode, leaned against the marble island in her state-of-the-art kitchen, meticulously sketching out plans for an upcoming anniversary dinner in a leather-bound journal. 20 years, she whispered, her voice a blend of deep affection and an almost imperceptible weariness. Eleanor was a rising star, a senior partner at Golden Gate Capital, a prestigious venture capital firm. Her sleek, raven hair, cut in a sharp bob, and her penchant for impeccably tailored Armani power suits exuded an air of formidable competence, earning her immense respect in the cutthroat world of finance. A framed photograph on the kitchen wall showed Eleanor and her husband, Julian, beaming, captured mid-laugh on a yacht. Julian, with his piercing emerald eyes and a distinguished silvering at his temples, was a respected professor of art history at Stanford University. His intellectual charm, refined taste, and an endearing, almost scholarly awkwardness were what had initially captivated Eleanor. To the world, they were the epitome of success, high-flying careers, a magnificent home, and an enviable partnership. Or so it appeared. Lately, however, a shadow had fallen over Julian. Once home by 7, he'd been arriving closer to 10, sometimes even 11, for the past 6 months. Eleanor feigned understanding when he'd offer, faculty meetings ran late, or a new research grant proposal is demanding. But a knot of unease tightened within her. He'd become surgically attached to his new encrypted messaging app, taking his phone everywhere, even into their in-sit steam shower. Weekends, previously sacrosanct, were increasingly consumed by urgent departmental matters or off-campus seminars, drastically cutting into their shared time. Conversations had become clipped, superficial, and an unspoken chill, almost as tangible as the San Francisco fog, had crept into their master suite. Yet, when Julian suggested celebrating their 20th anniversary at Aurelia, the city's most exclusive, Michelin 3-star French-Californian fusion restaurant, Eleanor's heart had soared. Aurelia was notoriously difficult to secure a reservation for, and it was where, amidst a candlelit dinner overlooking the Golden Gate Bridge, they had decided to marry. Julian had remembered. There's still hope for us, she'd thought, a flicker of optimism rekindling in her eyes. What do you think? Can I still pull this off? Eleanor asked her confidante, Beatrice, over a video call. Displayed on her tablet was an image of Eleanor in a vintage Chanel velvet gown, a daring, low-backed number she hadn't worn in over a decade. Darling, you're breathtaking. Julian will need a paramedic. Beatrice's laughter was infectious, but it soon softened into a more serious tone. But, Ellie, truly, are you all right? Julian has seemed preoccupied. Don't you worry your pretty head. Eleanor cut her off, a touch too brightly. Marriages ebb and flow. This is just an ebb. The anniversary will set things right. After ending the call, Eleanor stared at the gown, now retrieved from its cedar-lined closet. She had poured everything into preserving her marriage to Julian. She flawlessly juggled her demanding career with managing their household, even feigning interest in his obscure Renaissance art symposiums. Still, she felt his emotional core drifting further and further away. On the day of their anniversary, Julian, quite uncharacteristically, arrived home before sunset. After showering and changing, he waited for Eleanor in their formal living room, a space adorned with contemporary art and antique Persian rugs. When she descended the grand staircase in the Chanel gown, Julian's eyes widened, a genuine spark igniting within them. Eleanor, you look magnificent, he breathed, presenting a velvet box. Inside lay a stunning sapphire pendant, surrounded by a constellation of diamonds. Julian, it's exquisite. Emotion welled as she embraced him. Julian smiled, returning the hug. For that brief moment, it felt like they'd rediscovered a connection long thought lost. "May I?" When Eleanor turned, Julian gently lifted her hair and fastened the pendant. "Perfect," he murmured, his smile lingering, yet his eyes held an unreadable depth. Eleanor pushed aside the familiar unease, linking her arm through his. "Shall we? It feels like it's going to be an extraordinary evening." As they stepped out into the cool San Francisco night, Eleanor truly believed tonight would be transformative. She desperately hoped this anniversary would be the catalyst for mending their fractured bond. Aurelia, perched atop Nob Hill, was a culinary temple converted from a Gilded Age mansion. Diffuse light from hand-blown glass chandeliers cast a warm glow on plush velvet seating and modern art installations. As Eleanor and Julian arrived, a liveried doorman swept open the heavy oak doors, greeting them with refined politeness. "Mr. and Mrs. Ainsworth, we've been eagerly anticipating your arrival." After they were announced at the reception, the maitre d', a distinguished gentleman named Gerard who seemed to be in his late 60s, his silver hair impeccably styled, guided them. Gerard's bearing spoke of decades orchestrating flawless dining experiences. "I understand it is your wedding anniversary. We have prepared a very special table for you." Gerard led them to an intimate, glass-enclosed conservatory at the rear of the main dining hall. It offered a breathtaking, panoramic vista of the city's glittering skyline and the bay. The table was strewn with white orchids. Eleanor was visibly moved, her breath catching. "Thank you, Gerard. This is truly lovely," she said, her smile genuine. Julian merely gave a curt nod and immediately pulled out his phone, his thumb already scrolling. At the gesture, a small sigh escaped Eleanor, but she was determined not to let it spoil the evening. When Gerard presented the extensive wine list, Julian scanned it briefly and declared, "A bottle of Dom Perignon Rose, the 2008. Once Gerard had retreated, Julian announced, "I'll just use the powder room," and vacated his seat. Alone, Eleanor gazed at the sweeping night view. The city lights, like scattered diamonds, reminded her of that magical evening 20 years ago when she'd accepted Julian's proposal. Everything had shimmered with promise then. She touched her wedding band and smiled wistfully. Nearly 15 minutes later, Julian returned. He seemed agitated, his gaze darting around before he retrieved his phone again. "A pressing email from the dean?" Eleanor inquired. Julian hastily pocketed the device. "Yes, a slight complication with a visiting fellow, but I shall endeavor to ignore it tonight." The champagne arrived, and they toasted, the delicate chime of their crystal flutes echoing in the hushed space. Eleanor summoned her courage. "Julian, darling, I've been feeling a certain distance between us lately." Julian's expression flickered with surprise before his usual composure settled back. "Whatever do you mean, my dear? You're home so late. You're barely present on weekends. And that phone, it's become an extension of your hand," Eleanor stated, her voice soft but firm. "Is there something amiss?" Julian heaved a theatrical sigh. "It's merely the pressures of academia, Eleanor. A new research initiative has begun, and everyone is stretched to their limit. There's absolutely nothing for you to concern yourself with." He smiled, a placid, almost patronizing smile, but his eyes remained cold. Eleanor let it drop. She didn't want a confrontation, not tonight. "I understand, but I wish we could cultivate a relationship where we confide in each other more." Gerard reappeared with the menus. Tonight, Chef Antoine's tasting menu begins with a duo of seared scallops and Ostra caviar, followed by a main course of A5 Wagyu tenderloin with a black truffle reduction. Julian closed his menu without looking. "We'll have the chef's grand degustation for two." Eleanor was taken aback. The grand degustation was Aurelia's most opulent and notoriously expensive offering. "It's a special occasion," Julian said smoothly. "And let's pair it with a truly special wine." He indicated a 2010 Chateau Lafite Rothschild on the list. Eleanor's eyes widened further. It was a vintage that commanded a price upwards of $10,000 a bottle. Julian, such an extravagance. Nonsense, Julian interrupted. We can afford to indulge ourselves this evening, can't we? Gerard noted the order with a subtle bow and departed. Julian glanced at his phone again. I believe I need the powder room once more. This was the second time. Eleanor found it more than a little peculiar, but his uncharacteristic profligacy worried her more. While they were undeniably wealthy, this level of spending was something the usually frugal Julian would deem utterly reckless. While Julian was gone, Eleanor sipped her champagne, her mind racing. Was Julian experiencing some sort of guilt? Or was this a desperate, over-the-top attempt to make their anniversary memorable? As she mused, Julian's phone, left on the white linen tablecloth, vibrated. The screen briefly illuminated, displaying a partial message. Tonight is our final hurdle. Tomorrow, our new paradise awaits. The sender was simply S. Eleanor felt her blood run cold. She quickly looked away, trying to regulate her breathing. A torrent of terrifying possibilities flooded her mind. Was Julian embroiled in an affair? Or did this portend something far more sinister? Before Julian returned, Eleanor took a deep, steadying breath, schooling her features into a neutral mask. Dread and suspicion coiled in her stomach, but she needed to observe, to understand more. When Julian finally reappeared after another extended absence, his complexion was ashen. Are you quite all right? Eleanor asked. Just a touch of fatigue, he replied. The amuse-bouche arrived. Faced with the exquisitely presented morsels, Eleanor momentarily forgot her anxiety. It's beautiful, she murmured. Julian nodded, but his attention seemed elsewhere. He pulled out his phone yet again, furtively checking something. While delicately sampling her appetizer, Eleanor tried to draw Julian into conversation. Memories from their early courtship, their first trip to Italy, humorous anecdotes from their honeymoon in Bali. All cherished moments. But Julian's responses were monosyllabic, often just a distracted, yes. Before the main course was served, Julian excused himself for a third trip to the powder room. Eleanor could no longer suppress the maelstrom of anxiety and burgeoning anger. She fought the urge to follow him, to see if he was genuinely unwell or covertly communicating with someone. But she dismissed the thought. Such an act felt beneath her. When Gerard presented the main courses, Julian also returned. On Julian's plate was the perfectly seared A5 Wagyu. He stared at it, and, for a fleeting second, his expression hardened. What is it? Eleanor inquired. Julian forced a smile. My apologies, my stomach seems to have turned. I don't believe I can manage a bite today. But you ordered this incredibly expensive menu, Eleanor said, perplexed. As long as you enjoy it, my dear, that is all that matters, Julian replied. Your happiness is my happiness. There was a veneer of sincerity to his words, but Eleanor detected an undercurrent of something false. She glanced at her own plate, delicate pan-seared Chilean sea bass with a saffron beurre blanc. It looked divine, but her appetite, too, was rapidly vanishing. The sommelier presented the Lafite Rothschild with a flourish. Julian thanked him and filled Eleanor's glass. To your health, my love. Julian raised his glass, and to our many bright futures. As Eleanor clinked her glass against his, a peculiar sensation washed over her. She sensed a hidden meaning in Julian's words, his eyes, his every gesture. She maintained her smile but took only the smallest, most cautious sip of the wine. Julian checked his phone and made to stand yet again. Eleanor instinctively reached out, her fingers closing around his forearm. Going somewhere? Her voice was laced with an irritation she no longer tried to conceal. Terribly sorry, an urgent message from the department head. Julian began, then his expression shifted, as if sensing a change in Eleanor. No, it can wait. I shall remain with you tonight. He sat back down. However, an unspoken, heavy tension now permeated the space between them. Just as Eleanor was about to sample her sea base, Julian said, "Wait, my dear." Urgency thrummed in his voice. Eleanor paused, surprised, and looked at her husband. "Let us have a proper toast first." Julian took the Lafite Rothschild bottle and poured more of the deep ruby liquid into her glass. After refilling his own, he raised it, his hand discernibly trembling. "To our 20 years together." Eleanor looked deeply into her husband's eyes. An indescribable emotion swirled within their depths: tension, anxiety, perhaps even fear. She couldn't decipher it. She only knew, with chilling certainty, that these were not the gentle, erudite eyes of the Julian she had married. "To 20 years?" Eleanor echoed, raising her glass in response, but again, she only pretended to sip. Something was profoundly wrong. This opulent restaurant, the exorbitant wine, his unnatural demeanor, it all screamed a warning. Setting her glass down, Eleanor turned her attention back to the sea base. The artfully plated dish certainly looked tempting. However, noticing Julian not touching his own magnificent wagyu, her suspicion intensified. "You're not going to eat at all?" Julian smiled again. "My stomach is truly not cooperating." That smile seemed painfully strained, and tiny beads of perspiration were forming on his brow. He raised his wine glass again and took a deep draught. As Eleanor lifted her fork, a minor commotion near the restaurant's entrance drew her gaze. While she glanced in that direction, Julian's eyes darted to her plate, and, for a split second, he held his breath, an expression of intense anticipation on his face. By the time Eleanor looked back, he was already composed, smiling as if nothing had occurred. "It's a lovely dinner," Eleanor said, her voice carefully neutral. "But it's such a pity you can't enjoy it." "Yes, a terrible shame," Julian agreed, though he also seemed somewhat relieved. "But if you enjoy it, my dear, that is sufficient." Their strained exchange was interrupted by Gerard, who approached to refill their water glasses. Gerard performed the task with his usual quiet elegance, yet Eleanor detected a subtle urgency in his movements. Standing beside her as he poured, he murmured, so low it was almost inaudible, "Madam, if you would be so kind as to discreetly check beneath your side plate." His voice was a mere whisper. Julian, distracted by his phone, clearly hadn't heard. Gerard placed the water carafe down, gave a slight bow, and departed. His expression was undeniably grave. Eleanor was stunned. What could Gerard possibly mean? She glanced at her husband. Julian was engrossed in his phone, the perspiration on his forehead now more pronounced. "Perhaps the wine was a little too potent," Julian offered, smiling faintly as if making an excuse. "I must visit the powder room." The moment he left his seat, Eleanor's heart began to hammer against her ribs. Gerard's words echoed, "Discreetly check beneath your side plate." Beneath the plate? Why? After confirming Julian had disappeared towards the restrooms, she carefully, almost imperceptibly, lifted her bread plate, and she gasped. A small, folded piece of parchment was tucked underneath. Trying to appear casual to any observing eyes, Eleanor swiftly slid the note under her napkin. Her hands were trembling violently. Shielded by the linen, she unfolded the paper and read the stark, typewritten words, "There is a lethal substance in your main course. Do not consume it under any circumstances. Your husband intends to harm you." It felt as if the world had frozen. The words reverberated in Eleanor's mind. Lethal substance. Julian intends to harm me. A cruel joke? A malicious prank? Her hands shook harder. The cryptic message on Julian's phone, his bizarre behavior, his refusal to eat his own food, his persistent urging that she eat. All the disparate pieces snapped together, forming a horrifying mosaic. She suddenly recalled, 6 months prior, Julian had insisted they substantially increase her life insurance policy, a new one for $10 million. "Just a sensible precaution, darling," he'd said dismissively. The restaurant's luxurious ambience now felt like an opulent cage, trapping her. Eleanor tried to draw a deep breath, but her chest felt constricted. She couldn't distinguish nightmare from reality. The sound of Julian's approaching footsteps reached her. Eleanor frantically shoved the note into her evening bag and struggled to compose herself, though she knew her face must be ashen. "What's wrong?" Julian asked as he reseated himself. "You look dreadfully pale." "It's nothing." Eleanor attempted a smile, keenly aware of how unconvincing it must appear. "Just a wave of tiredness." Julian seemed almost relieved. I see. Quite understandable. You've been burning the candle at both ends." He reached for the Lafite, attempting to top up her glass. "A little more wine, perhaps?" "No, thank you," Eleanor replied quickly. "Actually, my stomach is also feeling a bit off." "Is that so?" Julian said. A flicker of panic crossed his features. "But it's such an exquisite dish. Won't you try just a small taste?" Eleanor felt a chill of pure terror at his words. Was he truly trying to make her eat poisoned food? Why? Why would the man she had loved for 2 decades do this? "Actually, my stomach is really starting to bother me now," Eleanor said, her voice firmer. "What a shame, for such a special dinner." A desperate edge entered Julian's expression. "Indeed, but since we're here, perhaps just one mouthful? I would be so disappointed." Eleanor stood abruptly. "I think I need to visit the ladies' room." She willed her trembling legs to move and walked towards the restrooms. The moment the ornate door of the ladies' lounge clicked shut behind her, Eleanor ducked into a vacant stall. With shaking hands, she retrieved her phone and dialed Beatrice. As soon as the call connected, she whispered urgently, "Something ghastly is happening." "Ellie? What is it?" Beatrice's voice was sharp with alarm. "Calm down, darling. Julian is trying to poison me." Choking back sobs, Eleanor recounted the evening's events. The note, Julian's strange behavior, his refusal to eat, his insistence that she consume her meal. "I'm calling the authorities. You need to get out of there immediately," Beatrice exclaimed. "But I don't have irrefutable proof yet." Eleanor's voice trembled. "What if I'm mistaken? What if this is some elaborate, cruel prank?" "Ellie, you cannot afford to take that risk," Beatrice insisted. "But if you feel you need more, seek assistance from the restaurant staff, especially the maitre d' who gave you the warning." "I will," Eleanor said. "I'll try to gather something more concrete, but I'll contact you immediately if anything else happens." After hanging up, Eleanor stared at her reflection in the large, gilt-edged mirror. Her face was chalk white, her eyes wide with a primal fear. She took several deep, steadying breaths, forcing herself to regain a semblance of composure. Before leaving the lounge, she took the note from her bag and reread the terrifying words, "Your husband intends to harm you." They possessed a chilling, undeniable reality. Eleanor returned the note to her bag and squared her shoulders. She had to remain cool, act rationally. She couldn't simply flee yet. First, she needed more definitive proof and a safe way to escape. Who could have imagined her life would be in jeopardy in such an unexpected, glamorous setting? 20 years of marriage to Julian. Shared dreams, laughter, sorrows. Was it all a meticulously crafted lie? Or had something fundamentally broken him? As Eleanor re-entered the dining room, she consciously tried to still the tremor in her hands. When Eleanor returned to the table, Julian was anxiously glancing at his expensive Patek Philippe watch. As she sat, he plastered on a strained smile. "Feeling any better? You were gone for quite some time." "Yes, a little." Eleanor feigned composure and looked at her untouched sea base. "Actually, my stomach is really not up to it. It's a terrible shame, such a special meal wasted." A look of distinct panic flashed across Julian's face. "I see. But as we're here, perhaps you could try just a morsel?" Chef Antoine poured his heart into this creation. "I really can't right now," Eleanor said decisively. "Perhaps we could have it packed to go?" "I can try it tomorrow when I'm feeling better." Julian's face visibly blanched. "To go?" Such haute cuisine doesn't travel well. Besides, it's our 20th anniversary dinner. Eleanor countered. At the very least, I'd like to convey my compliments to the chef personally for the beautiful presentation. Before Julian could protest, Eleanor signaled Gerard. Excuse me, would it be possible to have a brief word with Chef Antoine? The food looks magnificent, but regrettably, neither of us is feeling quite ourselves tonight. Gerard shot a quick, assessing glance at Julian. But of course, madam. The chef is exceptionally busy this evening, but a brief moment of his time should be manageable. If you would please come this way. He gestured for Eleanor to follow. I shall accompany you. Julian began to rise, but Gerard smoothly interjected. My apologies, monsieur, but for reasons of kitchen hygiene and workflow, we can only escort one guest at a time into the culinary area. Madam will return momentarily. Julian looked distinctly displeased, but sank back into his seat. Eleanor followed Gerard. Though they appeared to be heading towards the kitchen, they instead entered a discreet staff corridor. Once they were out of sight and earshot, Gerard stopped and turned to Eleanor, his expression grim. Madam, your husband was at Aurelia yesterday evening, he said in a low, urgent tone. He had a lengthy, private consultation with Chef Antoine. Afterwards, I observed Chef Antoine receiving a rather substantial envelope of cash. Eleanor's heart pounded. For what purpose? I cannot be entirely certain, madam, but I later saw Chef Antoine meticulously preparing a small, separate vial of what he termed a special seasoning, and instructing a commis chef to add its contents only to the dish designated for your specific table number and seat. Gerard then produced his own smartphone from his jacket pocket and showed Eleanor a discreetly taken photograph. It clearly depicted Julian passing a thick envelope to a man in chef's whites, recognizable as Chef Antoine. I captured this covertly. I was not entirely sure of its implications, but it struck me as highly irregular. Eleanor gasped. My sea base? It has. Indeed, madam. Chef Antoine personally oversaw the addition of this seasoning, exclusively to your sea base. Nothing of the sort was added to your husband's wagyu, Gerard continued, his face etched with concern. I have been with Aurelia for over 35 years. I have witnessed a great many things, but never anything of this nature. I was undecided about involving the authorities, as the direct evidence was, perhaps, tenuous. Evidence, Eleanor murmured. Could I possibly take a sample of the dish with me? For analysis. Gerard nodded, then produced a small, sterile takeaway container from a nearby service station. I anticipated such a request. He swiftly returned to their table and, with incredible deftness, transferred a significant portion of Eleanor's sea base into the container, replacing the lid. Please use this. Chef Antoine will never confess. I believe he and your husband are co-conspirators. Eleanor suddenly retrieved her own phone. Actually, Gerard, I have been recording our conversation, she admitted. Gerard looked surprised for a moment, then nodded in understanding. That too will serve as valuable corroboration. Thank you, Gerard, Eleanor said, her voice filled with profound gratitude. If you hadn't warned me. Think nothing of it, madam, Gerard replied. However, you must exercise extreme caution tonight. It might be prudent to depart early, perhaps feigning a marital disagreement. And under no circumstances should you be alone with him. Eleanor nodded, taking a deep breath to steady her nerves. I must play my part. Gerard escorted Eleanor back via the main dining route, acting as if they had just concluded a pleasant, brief meeting with the chef. Chef Antoine sends his profound apologies that you are not feeling well enough to enjoy his creation, he announced in a clear, professional voice as they neared the table. Eleanor returned to where Julian waited. He appeared to have already settled the bill. The chef? Julian inquired. He seemed terribly busy, Eleanor said. But when I explained I was unwell and couldn't manage the food, he was very understanding. Julian looked somewhat relieved. I see. Well then, shall we make our way home? Yes, let's, Eleanor agreed. She carefully placed the container with the food sample into her large evening bag and linked her arm through Julian's. Inwardly, she was a storm of fear and adrenaline, but outwardly, she projected the image of a tired, slightly disappointed wife. As they exited the restaurant, Gerard held the door for them. He gave Eleanor a minute, almost imperceptible nod. She returned it with equal subtlety. Once in their chauffeured car, Julian let out a long, drawn-out sigh. A most unfortunate end to our anniversary. Indeed, Eleanor agreed. But when one is feeling unwell, there's little to be done. The journey back to Pacific Heights was shrouded in a heavy silence. Watching the city lights blur past the window, Eleanor mentally rehearsed her next steps. In her handbag lay the food sample, the recording of her conversation with Gerard, and the digital copy of the photograph he had sent to her phone. If she presented this evidence to the San Francisco Police Department. During the drive, Julian occasionally cast sidelong glances at Eleanor. His expression was unreadable. Was it anger, disappointment, or some other emotion she couldn't name? Upon arriving at their townhouse, Julian dismissed the driver and switched off the car's engine. He turned to Eleanor, a strange, tight smile on his lips. "You should get some rest, my dear. I do hope you feel much improved by morning." "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "You too." She prayed her voice didn't betray her inner turmoil. Tomorrow, she would go to the police. Tonight, she had to maintain the charade to avoid arousing Julian's suspicions. Entering the house, Eleanor said, "I think I'll go straight to bed," and headed for the master suite. Julian remained in the vast living room, turning on the classical music station. Closing the bedroom door, Eleanor immediately sent a text to Beatrice. Evidence secured. Police tomorrow. Acting normal tonight. An immediate reply flashed back. Be vigilant. Call me instantly if anything changes. If you need me, I'll be there in 20 minutes to get you. Eleanor hid her phone beneath her pillow and closed her eyes, though sleep felt a million miles away. The next morning, Eleanor woke before dawn and quietly prepared herself. While Julian still slept soundly, oblivious, she slipped out of the house and into Beatrice's waiting Tesla, which whisked her directly to the SFPD headquarters. Arriving at the station, evidence in hand, Eleanor's expression was one of steely determination, fear now replaced by resolve. She presented everything she had gathered, the sample of the sea base, the audio recording of her conversation with Gerard, the damning photographs, to the lead detective. "You've endured a horrific ordeal, Mrs. Ainsworth," a seasoned female detective, Captain Eva Rostova, said gently, taking her hand. "You've shown immense courage and done precisely the right thing." The police immediately initiated forensic tests on the food sample and began interviewing all involved parties. Chef Antoine was brought in for questioning. The lab results were swift and conclusive. The sea base contained a lethal concentration of veratrum, a highly toxic plant alkaloid. Gerard's unwavering testimony, the photographs, and Eleanor's recording provided irrefutable evidence. A few evenings later, while Eleanor was staying at Beatrice's secure penthouse apartment, a call came from Captain Rostova. Julian had been arrested at their Pacific Heights home. A search of his encrypted devices revealed detailed messages outlining the entire murderous plot with his lover, a graduate student named Serena Monroe. Serena was also taken into custody as an accomplice. "Why?" Eleanor asked Captain Rostova during a follow-up interview. "Why would he try to kill me?" "A life insurance policy in your name, Mrs. Ainsworth, valued at $10 million. It appears he and Ms. Monroe intended to use the payout to start a new life abroad," the detective answered quietly. They confessed to an affair spanning the last 5 years. The trial commenced 3 months later. Eleanor, composed and resolute, faced Julian in court, looking directly into his eyes. In her former husband's gaze, there was no remorse, only a cold fury that his meticulously crafted plan had unraveled. Ultimately, Julian Ainsworth was found guilty of attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder, receiving a sentence of 25 years to life in a state penitentiary. Serena Monroe received a 15-year sentence as an accomplice. 6 months after the trial concluded, Eleanor finalized their divorce. She sold the Pacific Heights townhouse and decided to forge a new path. "This is the last of it," Beatrice said, carrying a small, antique wooden box into Eleanor's newly acquired, sun-drenched loft in Sausalito, overlooking the bay. Beside her, Gerard, now retired from Aurelia, wiped a bead of sweat from his brow. "Thank you both for everything." Eleanor smiled warmly at her two staunchest allies. Gerard, having testified courageously, had become a cherished friend. 1 year after the incident, the trio celebrated the grand opening of the Phoenix Rise, a small, artisanal bakery and cafe focused on second chances for its ingredients, its employees, and its patrons. It quickly became a beloved local spot, a haven for those who had weathered life's storms. One tranquil evening, as Eleanor was reconciling the cafe's accounts, she found a plain envelope from Corcoran State Prison mixed with the business mail. The sender was Julian Ainsworth. With hands that trembled only slightly, she opened it. Inside was a letter, filled with rambling apologies and a professed epiphany about the man he had become during his incarceration. Eleanor read it several times, a complex swirl of emotions, pity, remembered love, and a lingering bitterness washing over her. She made a decision. She would not reply. However, unknown to anyone, she quietly established an anonymous trust fund to be made available for his vocational training and rehabilitation support upon his eventual release, should he ever genuinely seek it. Surrounded by the comforting aroma of freshly baked bread and the quiet hum of her new life at the Phoenix Rise, Eleanor gazed out at the twinkling lights of San Francisco across the water. Life had dealt her a devastating betrayal, but it had also gifted her a profound new beginning. She had learned, in the most visceral way, that true family isn't defined by blood or vows, but by the unbreakable bonds forged with those who stand by you when darkness falls.